Have you ever noticed how easy it is to just nod along when someone is explaining something really complex to you? Like you hear the information, you get it in the moment, but the second you have to explain it back to them,
Right.
your brain just completely short circuits.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You have all these random notes floating around, but you can't actually play the song.
Exactly. And that's exactly what we're digging into today on this deep dive. We're exploring a really fascinating set of notes that maps a framework called EduProtocols directly onto Bloom's taxonomy.
Right, and specifically the higher, more demanding tiers of blooms, we're moving way past the basic remember and understand levels.
Yeah, because we all kind of know what those look like. So today, our mission is to focus heavily on what the sources call the processing grooves. So if you're out there trying to, learn a complex new skill for your career, or you have to process a massive amount of dense information for a project, these specific frameworks will completely change how you organize your thinking.
They really will, because we're entirely shifting the cognitive burden here. Passive absorption is out, active cognitive architecture is the goal.
Right.
The sources actually use this great musical metaphor. They frame this as exploring the B-side playlist.
I love that framing.
It's great, right? We're intentionally turning up the gain, stepping away from just, repetitive drills and forcing the brain to dismantle and reconstruct what we're learning.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit. Before we drop the needle on these core tracks, which the notes categorize as tracks 4 through 6, can you briefly explain the connection between blooms and these protocols? Like, what's the baseline here?
Yeah, for sure. So to understand the processing grooves, we first have to recognize what they're built upon. The bottom of the Bloom's pyramid relies on what the sources call the foundational beats.
Okay, foundational beats. What does that look like in practice?
Basically, these are lower tier protocols like Fast and Curious or Thin Slides. Fast and Curious is designed for low stakes, high repetition vocabulary acquisition.
Gotcha. So just getting the raw data into working memory.
Exactly. And Thin Slides asks the learner to distill a concept into just one definitive word and a single visual anchor. It just proves basic comprehension.
So these foundational beats are basically just getting the lyrics memorized, but you aren't actually composing the music yet.
That is a perfect way to put it. You know the words, but you aren't making anything with them. And honestly, that is where a lot of learning processes just stop dead.
Yeah, totally. People just memorize the vocab and think they've mastered the subject.
Right. But the bottleneck in any complex learning isn't getting the raw material, it's the leap into application. And that leap is where comprehension usually falls apart.
Which perfectly transitions us into the mid-tier of blooms, right? The processing grooves, where students are forced to use information in new structures.
Exactly. This is where we drop the needle on track 4, which the sources call 8 parts, or sentence parts.
Okay, track 4. Now, looking at the notes, this one kind of masquerades as a basic grammar drill, right? But the sources categorize it as high-level applying. How does that work?
Well, the mechanics are super interesting. The learner is handed a highly rigid grammatical formula. So, for example, they might be told they have to write a single sentence that contains, like, a noun, 2 adjectives, an action verb, and a prepositional phrase.
Wait, let me stop you there. Because forcing someone to worry about prepositional phrases when they're trying to learn, say, the phases of mitosis or supply chain mechanics, doesn't that seem like an unnecessary cognitive hurdle?
I get why you'd think that. It looks like a distraction.
Yeah, aren't we just distracting them from the actual content?
But if we connect this to the bigger picture, it actually operates as a structural constraint that forces semantic understanding. You can't just fill in the blanks with random words.
Oh, because they have to use the new content vocabulary from the foundational beats.
Yes, they have to implement those strict structural rules using the newly learned concepts. So they are taking raw, factual material and actively building something functional with it. They are executing knowledge within a specific structural solve.
Oh, wow. Okay. It's like giving someone a blueprint for a house. The blueprint is the sentence structure, but they have to use the brand new bricks they just manufactured, which is the content vocabulary, to build it.
That's a great analogy.
They can't just define the brick, right? They have to use it to bear weight. If they don't actually understand how the concepts relate to each other, the sentence just won't make sense.
Exactly. If you can just recite a definition, that's just a brick sitting on the grass. But taking a concept and weaving it into a perfectly structured, complex sentence because the protocol demanded it, that is high-level application.
Okay, that totally makes sense for isolated sentences. But real-world comprehension usually means wrestling with, messy paragraphs and bigger ideas.
Oh, absolutely.
So once you can apply vocabulary and a structure, how do you handle bigger concepts? This logically shifts us from application up to the analyzing tier of blooms, right?
It does. And that brings us right to track 5, the cyber sandwich.
Track 5. Okay, here's where it gets really interesting to me. Because the B-side groove for this track is the transition from individual work to deep collaboration.
Yes, the workflow here is so deliberate, it scales up the cognitive load. It actually starts back down at understanding. The individual learner spends, say, 10 minutes reading a dense text and taking notes.
So just a solo interaction with the material at first.
Right. But then the protocol forces a rapid pivot into analyzing. The learner has to take their isolated notes and sit down with a peer to compare what they extracted.
But wait, if you pair two people up and they both fundamentally misunderstood the reading, doesn't the cyber sandwich just result in them sharing the wrong answers?
You would think so, but the framework actually relies on the friction of discrepancies. It's incredibly rare for two people to extract the exact same incorrect information from a complex text.
Oh, that's true. They'll have different wrong ideas.
Right. So they don't just share notes. They have to distinguish overlapping facts and debate their differences. If I pull out one piece of data as the core thesis, and you pull out something completely different, the protocol dictates that we can't just combine our lists.
You actually have to justify your choices to each other.
Exactly. We have to defend why our specific fact matters, which means we're weighing the text's evidence against each other in real time.
So that debate phase is basically forcing them to draw connections among ideas. It's an evaluative filter.
Yeah.
They're constantly asking, where's the evidence for that in the text?
Yes, the debate itself is the mechanism of analysis. And the output of this friction is that they have to co-write a summary. They take the synthesis of their argument and co-author a single paragraph.
And I'm guessing that shared summary is much stronger than their individual efforts.
Vastly stronger. Because they've stress-tested each other's assumptions and discarded the irrelevant fluff. It's literally the sound of organizing and differentiating information together.
Okay, so Cyber Sandwich is clearly amazing for analyzing text and concepts. But what happens when the information isn't a narrative? Like, what if it's purely quantitative data?
That requires a completely different type of analytical processing.
Which creates the perfect thematic link to our next stop. Let's drop the needle on track 6. Number mania. The sources define this as pure analysis.
Oh, number mania is fantastic. It fundamentally changes how you interact with a text.
Imagine you're a detective walking into a messy room. You aren't there to admire the wallpaper or read a story. You are there to extract the fingerprints and categorize the physical evidence.
I love that framing. That is exactly what happens. Students dive into complex texts with this highly specific, almost predatory lens. They aren't reading for flow. They are specifically hunting for scattered data and statistics.
Because a 10-page report might just bury its crucial numbers inside these long, boring paragraphs.
Exactly. So their initial job is extraction. They pull every raw metric out and isolate it.
But extraction is just making a list. Where does the higher order analysis actually happen?
The analysis happens in the restructuring. Once they have this pile of raw data, the protocol forces them to categorize it. And, crucially, they must analyze the best way to physically display those metrics by building an infographic.
Oh, wow. So they have to look at all these isolated stats and figure out the hidden hierarchy.
Right. They have to make spatial decisions. They have to decide which number is the focal point, which numbers group together to show a trend.
And which ones are just outliers. So by forcing them to decide, which statistics should literally be larger on the page, you're forcing them to make analytical judgments about weight and importance.
Yes. They are questioning and testing abstract data and turning it into a concrete visual reality. They're restructuring it rhythmically until the hidden patterns become glaringly clear.
Okay, so we have all these incredible individual tools, 8 parts for application, Cyber Sandwich for conceptual analysis, Number Mania for data patterns. But here's the ultimate question. How do you create a playlist that actually flows through the entire learning process without exhausting your brain?
Well, the creators of these protocols strongly advocate against just using them randomly. The real magic happens with what they call the stacking strategy, or, keeping with the theme, bonus track, the remix.
The remix, I love it. What is the core philosophy there?
The philosophy is intentional cognitive escalation. You run a lower-tier framework, immediately followed by a higher-tier framework to naturally escalate the cognitive rigor.
The sources actually outline a specific 45-minute masterclass using this exact strategy. Can we walk the listener through this ultimate stack?
Let's do it. It is brilliantly designed. Step 1 anchors right at the bottom of Bloom's. Remember, you kick off with a 5-minute Fast and Curious pre-quiz.
So just 5 minutes of high repetition vocabulary acquisition. You aren't expecting deep comprehension, just priming the working memory.
Exactly, just loading the terms. Then, step 2, you immediately shift gears and jump up to analyze. You transition seamlessly into a 15-minute cyber sandwich.
Okay, so they read a short text using those exact terms they just learned, extract notes, sit with a partner, debate it, and read a summary, all in 15 minutes.
Right. So in just 20 minutes total, they've gone from not knowing the vocabulary to successfully negotiating its meaning with a peer. They are processing it in real time.
But the stack doesn't stop there. Step 3 pushes you to the very peak of the pyramid, right? To the create level.
It does. The final chunk of this masterclass uses a heavy hitter track from the top of Bloom's called Sketch and Tell.
Sketch and tell. Okay, so wrapping up with a visual component.
Right. The learner takes the purely textual concept they just debated, and they have to translate it into a unique, self-designed visual layout. And what's fascinating here is the cognitive conversion load.
Right, because translating a text into a drawing is considered a higher cognitive function than just writing an essay about it. Why is that?
Well, when you write an essay, you can lean on the author's original phrasing, you can paraphrase, you have the crutch of their vocabulary.
Ah, but you can't copy and paste text into a drawing.
Exactly. To translate a concept visually, you have to invent a metaphor or a spatial representation that accurately reflects how those ideas relate. It strips away the vocabulary crutch and forces pure conceptual understanding.
That makes total sense. If you don't actually understand how gravity affects an orbit, you literally cannot draw it accurately. The visual medium exposes the gaps immediately.
It really does. It is a high cognitive conversion load.
It's just wild to me that by stacking these specific tracks, Fast and Curious, into Cyber Sandwich, into Sketch and Tell You, can take someone completely through Bloom's taxonomy in under 45 minutes. From zero knowledge to engineering a completely unique synthesis.
It proves that deep learning isn't just about spending hours reading. It's about architectural sequencing.
So what does this all mean for you listening? We've moved from simply using information to actively breaking it down and finding the deeper structures. And whether you are prepping for a major make-or-break meeting, catching up on an entire field of study, or just organizing personal research, this approach is a game changer.
It really prevents that feeling of drowning in noise.
Exactly. Intentionally shifting from basic recall, like Fast and Curious, to structural analysis, like Number Mania or Cyber Sandwich, is how you prevent information overload. It forces you to bear weight on the load-bearing concepts and build genuine mastery.
You're managing the cognitive load instead of just letting it pile up.
Right. So I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. We usually default to learning through passive repetition, which is fundamentally inefficient. But if you can move through the entire spectrum of human learning, from memorizing basic facts to engineering a completely unique visual synthesis in just 45 minutes by stacking the right mental frameworks, what previously impossible or incredibly dense topic could you completely master on your next lunch break if you just remixed your approach?